Or
There
you
we
can,
go.
yeah, you may have to change it to numbers.
Yeah.
From,
Okay.
there you
So
go.
I'm on the second slide. Everybody see that? Am I
Yes.
sharing my? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So why do y'all want to grow vegetables? Well, there's lots of reasons people are interested in growing vegetables. Certainly with the things that we've encountered here lately. I think that certainly with COVID, the COVID-19 scenario, I think people have had a lot more interest in growing their own vegetables or raising their own chickens, their own cattle. But certainly growing vegetables in a garden can certainly help individuals during this time, at least as a mental and physical exercise to get outside and do things. But certainly in the past, people were growing vegetables because they actually wanted to sell them. The fact that farmers markets have really grown, in the past, or at least when I grew a garden quite intensely in my back at home, most of the time I grew the vegetables and gave them away because there was no farmers markets. So, it was something that I did because I liked to do it. But now growing vegetables can actually help, supplement an income. Also, by having your own vegetable garden, you can choose whether you want to use organic products or organic methods versus man-made synthetic products or methods. So that's a reason a lot of folks have done their own gardening. They're basically, for most cases, home gardening is done, through organic practices. Also, people can recall their what I call their old-timey vegetable varieties or heirloom vegetables that you can't go buy at the store compared to, what you can buy at the store, the current variety. So you could actually grow some, heirloom tomatoes, heirloom watermelons, heirloom peppers, all these other things that you're not going to be able to find at the store. So these are kind of the reasons people are, really, you see this expansion of vegetable gardening going on at this time. Again, basically, I believe everyone should have already have purchased the new Master Gardener Handbook. It's different than before. Before it was a 3-ring binder. Now it's more like a book. Basically, I'll cover some things in chapter 10, but I will be bouncing around different chapters because I do want to highlight some important things when it comes to vegetable gardening. Of course, just general guidelines. We want to select the recommended varieties for your area. I did give you all a handout with varieties and where you could purchase them. And those are the varieties that are highlighted in yellow are ones that I recommend and familiar with. Again, varieties is very important, but also as important is planting them at the right time. And that's very critical. I've had people try to grow carrots in the middle of summer, and that is true. I'm not making that up. So understanding which vegetables are your cool season vegetables, which are your warm season vegetables, especially as master gardeners, is very important. Again, we want to prepare the soil and we want to fertilize. Most of these vegetables require some level of fertility. A few do not. That pretty much would do well with the soil mixture you might prepare or the soil that you have. But for all practical purposes, a good soil preparation and fertility program is important to be successful with your vegetable gardening. Of course, we want to control the pests, whether they're weeds, diseases, or insects, especially in a garden scenario, because for the most part, you're just going to have a few plants. And if the insects get there or the disease gets there, well, you're probably going to have no plants or no production from those plants. So it's pretty critical that you pay attention to your pests and try to understand them. We're not going to go through all of them today, but hopefully you do have an entomologist that talks about gives you all an insect training, and a plant pathologist that gives you disease training, and maybe to some degree cover weeds as well by someone. Again, also with your when you're gardening, you want to have adequate soil moisture, and that is more complex than that statement is saying, because some vegetables require more water than others. And if you water them equally, well, one is going to suffer by either having too much water or not having enough water. So understanding their moisture requirements, lumping those that have high water requirements with each other and the low water requirement vegetables could help you with that. But certainly having the proper water regime is very important. And for some vegetables, just knowing when to harvest, when is the right time to harvest, is also critical in terms of the quality of the product that you're going to consume. So we're going to go ahead and select a site where would you want to have your garden. And if you go to page 193 in that Master Gardener Handbook, it will go more in depth. But basically, you want to place your garden somewhere in your backyard or wherever you're going to put it. At least gets 8 hours of sunlight. Meaning, you know, if you're going to be next to a large tree, next to a building, that's going to be unlikely. It needs to be moved away, and you could estimate that you certainly need to be having a site that has at least 8 hours of sunlight, direct sunlight on the plants. The soil has to have good internal and external drainage. I won't go with the internal drainage because that talks about the soil structure down below, but external drainage basically would be the reason, for example, the background that I'm using is there's beds on that field, and farmers plant on a raised bed or they plant on a bed. So that is a type of external drainage that they're doing. So the plant, so when it rains or there's excess water, the plant roots to some degree, or at least lift it and up and away from that water. So there is some drainage. Again, your site that you select, you want it free of competition. And that competition can come from weeds, meaning some people plant a garden in the soil, maybe next to a fence line, and that fence line is difficult to control the weeds, and the weeds go into the garden, and you have, they start to basically, the weeds and the trees start to take the moisture and the fertility away from your site. And of course, you want to have good quality water. And I believe there was a question, so if someone could read out that question to me. Vince?
Yeah. Does indirect light count towards the 8+ hours of sunlight?
Does what?
Does indirect sunlight count towards the 8+ hours of sunlight?
I would say that's a no. I mean, when I'm talking about 8 hours, I mean 8 hours of direct sunlight. You get your sun's up at about 10 o'clock in the morning. That should be probably high enough to start getting that, the light, especially if it's next to your house or next to your building. So when we talk about the 8 hours of sunlight, we're talking about 8 hours of direct sunlight.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, water, I guess, for most folks is going to be from the city or municipal. Again, that can be, rather costly. Again, I would recommend that you use drip irrigation. That would be a way to reduce the cost, because basically using drip irrigation, you reduce your water input as on an average about by half. So if you were to take your regular water hose and water your garden, or take your sprinkler and turn the sprinkler on in your garden, you would use double the amount of water than if you used a drip irrigation system. I know people at first that begin with their gardens, are beginning, are have an intimidation factor of installing the drip irrigation. But I would say that once you're exposed to it, it's the easiest thing there is. It's just basically hooking up a bunch of plastic. You could actually set a timer. You could, do lots of things that would make it more hands-free in terms of irrigating your vegetables. So I would certainly say if you're a beginning gardener and you haven't messed with drip irrigation on your plants or your garden, I think you need to at least make an attempt of trying to understand and using drip irrigation, especially because you will save about half the water and in that kind of scenario. The other scenario that might happen is someone might have a well, meaning the water comes from below ground. There's a well. I would caution folks, especially in South Texas, that if they are going to use a well to irrigate their vegetables or even their yard or even their trees, that they find out what is the salt content of that water. Generally speaking, if you're and I'll just say this, if you're above 2100 parts per million total salts, that's going to be too salty. Maybe drip irrigation can help, but in the end, that's going to be too salty. And there are most wells, at least the ones here in the Rio Grande Valley that I've, sampled, they tend to run between 3,000 and 5,000 parts per million, which is too salty for vegetables. So, I would say, I would caution about wells. You could find wells that are between 1,400 and 2,100, and that would be okay, but you would have to plant those vegetables that are more tolerant. If it turns out to be less than 1,400, then you're in pretty good shape. I believe there's some questions. Vince?
Michelle asked why drip irrigation uses less water.
Well, that's a good question. So, we've done, drip irrigation's kind of been around since the mid 1980s, and there is a huge cost factor for growers to implement drip irrigation. The cost of putting it down, but in the end, with all the trials that we have done, that have been done, not myself, including myself, but people even before me, we always come up to the same answer. We end up using half the amount of water in comparison to furrow irrigated. We're comparing this to furrow irrigated scenario. So I know for a fact if you're putting water on top, you're losing a lot of that water. I'll say to some degree evaporation, but the reality is that drip irrigation is right there in the root zone and just putting out the adequate amount of water that those plants need. So in the long run,
if we're hand watering to the root zone, it might be closer to what drip irrigation is. It's just that the absorption is better with drip irrigation because it's slow and steady instead of a flood and thirst.
Correct. Yes, correct. But I would then again say, drip irrigation is an intimidating thing, but I mean, once y'all get a training and you use it, I mean, I was intimidated when I first began with it. Now I don't do anything without drip irrigation. It's really a simplistic system once you get your hands wet. So I would encourage you to
so for the home gardener, it'd be more of a time-saving thing. For example, I could run my drip irrigation from my rain barrel for half an hour and water all my plants instead of going 1 to 1 to 1 to 1 to 1,
Exactly.
and taking 2 to 3 hours to water the 100 plants that I have.
That's correct. So, yeah. Okay. Any other
Does that help,
questions?
Michelle?
Yes. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Awesome.
Does that also affect damage to the plants if you have water on the leaves and the fruit?
You know, I mean, that would only apply to sprinkler irrigation. If you had a sprinkler irrigation and you're keeping the leaves wetter, and I mean wetter in the sense that they're going to have more free moisture hour-wise or time-wise during the day, yes, you would be increasing foliage diseases by doing that. So it would, in that case, it would improve your disease scenario. Yes.
We had a question that goes back to the lighting.
Yes.
It was about what about outhouses? Is there a different time limit on sun exposure for hothouse planting?
Well, I mean, I guess if we're talking about hothouse, we're talking about a plastic covering. You know, if we're talking about a clear plastic, I mean, they're still getting enough sunlight. You know, then there's at least what I'd say a minimum requirement of 8 hours. You know, if you start cutting it shorter than that, the plants have trouble. The plants don't need 12 hours either. So it's you know, in South Texas, the way the intensity of our light is, if you just can get 8 hours, that's more than enough. I found that out with my papayas. I had papayas that were growing with no shade cloth and papayas with shade cloth. And the shade cloth basically blocked 80% of the sunlight. Of course, this is kind of like an open field. And the papayas in the shade grew taller and produced more than the papayas that were out in full sun. So I would say that when I'm going to go back to vegetables. For vegetables and vegetable gardening, you got to have the 8 hours. But what I'm trying to say is the more hours of sunlight does not necessarily equate to you know, more production or more productivity in South Texas. So as long as you meet those 8 hours, you'll be okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now I'm going to talk about the salinity that I just talked about over, you know, the 2,100 parts per million, the 1,400, the 2,100. So you may send a water sample off, and they're not gonna give you the numbers I discussed. They're gonna give you these other numbers, which is called an EC, or electrical conductivity. Basically meaning the more salt in the water sample, the more electricity it can conduct. So the EC values of, and that's the measurement, whatever you want to call it, millimeters per ohm per centimeter, that is the measurement. But so when you get your water report, you're not going to get those 2,100 or 1,400 to 2,100 numbers that I talked about, or less than 1,400. You're going to get these other numbers, these EC numbers, but they can be basically converted to parts per million. So basically, each part per million has a value of 700 parts per million. So if you looked at class 4 water, which is doubtful, that would be EC reading of 2 to 3, basically translating to 1,400 to 2,100 parts per million. I just wanted to explain that, because maybe sometimes when I start talking about parts per million and you start sending water samples off or soil samples off, they're going to give you, they're not going to give you parts per million. They're going to give you this electrical conductivity values. So I just want you to understand, as master gardeners, that there's a relationship there, and that's how that breaks down. And that's in chapter 7 of your book. Again, just briefly, if you looked at the water requirements of the vegetables in your gardens, basically, if you look at celery, it's going to be one of your highest water requiring vegetables. It's going to require basically 30 to 35 inches per acre. I know this is given in a per acre basis, but it'd be relative to your home garden in comparison to, say, spinach and watermelons, where that are 10 to 15 inches of water per acre. So basically, it would take nearly 3 times more water to make celery than it would for spinach and watermelon. So the basic take-home message is you wouldn't want to be planting the spinach next to your celery and watering them equally. If you were, you're probably watering sufficiently enough for your spinach, but probably not sufficiently enough for your celery. Okay. Not going to go through that, but that was just basically a breakdown of furrow irrigated, sprinkler, and drip systems in place in the field. Now I'm going to basically raised beds, or discussing a little bit about drainage, and this is on page 198 of your handbook. Basically, if you look at the picture that's labeled bedded ground, you can see this wide, high bed in which the plants are. You can also see that there's been a rain event. It's rained, and water has collected. What I call the hole in the ground is the furrows, and this is the bed. And in the furrows, you can see water. So as you can see, these plants are growing on the bed, just like farmers bed the ground, and the roots are basically elevated above the water, or where it's the wettest, and it would provide some external drainage. That is basically what is going on when you make a raised bed. You're creating this bedded ground, but basically putting boards by it. Therefore, when it does rain, it would rain in your raised bed, but the water would run out on the edges, on the bottom part of the board. So you're basically lifting the plants up and out of the water. And therefore, because if you get excessive moisture, especially for vegetables, they can certainly not get the oxygen, diseases can develop, and you basically drown them. The vegetables would drown. That's not to say that you can't have a successful garden planting flat on the ground. That picture on the bottom is my garden years ago, not recently, years ago. And I didn't do a raised bed because I did everything by hand with a shovel and a hoe. I didn't have a tiller, and it was, on the one side of my walkway. And so I just realized, I came to the realization that if I did have a rain event and lots of water stood where it couldn't go anywhere, that I was going to have dead vegetable plants. That was my understanding. So I knew that was a possibility, although based on the fact that I did not want to take shovels and hoes to make a bed to plant, mainly because of my bad back, I pretty much plant flat on the ground. But the best way to grow them is up bedded, or this raised bed as you normally see. Again, soil preparation. I'm sure you probably, I don't know how many classes y'all have been in so far. I don't know if you've already covered soils, but certainly you want to run a soil test, especially if you're making your own soil for your raised bed. Because many times when people are making their soil, whether they're using sand, potty mix, vermiculite, compost, they inevitably turned out making a very salty composition of soil. So for surely, even if you make your own, your own soil for your raised bed, I would run a soil test. You want to look at, of course, what's the content of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but also I would highly recommend on whether you're doing a soil test for your regular soil, or you're going to plant, or your raised bed, that you do a detailed salinity report. That's an extra $10 at the Texas A&M Soils Lab, but it's well worth the money. You know, I've gotten a phone call from schools. You know, the schools have tried to do a lot of gardening, a lot of gardens at schools. And I remember one time one of the schools called me and told me all their vegetables died except for beets and Swiss chard. And turns out that beets and Swiss chard are very salt tolerant. They can take lots of salt, but all the other vegetables that they had planted, whatever ones they were very salt sensitive, and they died. And we took, of course, samples off, and it was extremely, the soil was that they had prepared or made was extremely salty. So just be aware of that. Again, we want to incorporate lots of organic matter through compost, whether it's from plant material or even if it's animal material, make sure that it's correctly composted. Basically, when you do go through a compost, a proper composting, that's basically using the microorganisms to decompose all the organic matter and basically turn it into nutrients. In that process, they end up destroying the bad bacteria like the E. coli and the salmonella if it's done properly. You know, compost has its advantages. It can also improve drainage, provide nutrition. So properly composted compost is safe to use. Half not properly composted or raw manure or raw, you know, that can, you know, lead to food safety scenarios. And if your soil test comes back that you need to add nutrients, well, you can add organic nutrients or man-made synthetic fertilizers. Just real quick in soils, I mean, I'm a soils person. As you can see in my background, I like to put everything in the soil. I'm not someone that's going to try to create, you know, a raised bed or I guess another scenario. I think that the soils that we have here in South Texas, which I assume are the same in Nueces County, they basically run from a pH of 6.5. It would be considered acidic, with 7 being the middle, meaning it's neither acidic nor basic or alkaline, to alkaline soils such as a pH of 8.3. Now, if you were to read the books, you know, take your book in chapter 5, I'm not even sure what chapter 5 would even say. It would basically say that a pH of 8.3 would not be good for growing vegetables. Well, that is not true. Vegetables, there are some vegetables that would suffer. The legumes, your beans would not do very well in a pH of 8.3, but all your other vegetables would do quite well. So that's basically what I've come to find out, that many of the vegetables we can grow in our soils here in the valley are low in organic matter, meaning they have about 1% organic matter, which means we have to add compost. We have to add organic matter to the soils to basically help those soils in many ways. But our soils are also very fertile, and they're fertile in the aspect that they're high in potassium and high in calcium, things that plants need. So while our soils may not have the ideal perfect pH of a 6.5 to a 6.9, as the books might say, it does have fertility there that helps these soils be very productive. Another terminology, and I'm sure that y'all are going to have a soils person, but I just want to make sure that y'all know that you know, we use the terminology loam, a loam soil, loamy soil, and we can have a clay loam to a sandy loam. Just understand that a loam soil basically means a soil with the three soil types, meaning clay, sand, and silt. Okay, so a clay loam would have clay, sand, and silt, but it would have more clay than sand and silt. A sandy loam would have clay and silt particles, but it'd be more on the sandy side. So loam soils are those soils that I will say are already mixed. They're already mixed with the three soil particles, sand, silt, and clay. Is just, and that's what the soils happen to be here in the Rio Grande Valley. So they're already already been mixed. They might be a little bit more on the clay side, they might be a little bit more on the sandy side, but they still are good soil mixtures for good production of crops, including vegetables. I'm not going to go too much through how to collect a soil sample, but I do want to go through the salinity. So again, you do collect a soil sample, send it off to A&M, pay, or wherever you send it off to, pay the extra amount, at least at A&M, it's an extra $10 to get the detailed salinity report. And again, they won't give you parts per millionth, but they'll give you this EC value, and the EC numbers are a little different from the water values. But basically, what I consider, kind of a 1.6 and below is fine, and that's normally where our soils are generally from 1 to 1.6. When I see soil readings of 1.61 to 3.2, maybe there are things you can do there to help remove the salt and be successful. But if your soil comes back greater than 3.2, it's basically a no-go. Yeah, I mean, you'll know it when you plant crops in a soil that has a 3.2 EC value. That's just that soil is just too salty for plant. So I like to see the numbers to be below 1.6, and then we really got to be thinking about it when they're between that 1.6 and 3.2 value. I guess I just, again, this is a detailed salinity report, and just to go through with it, basically, the regular report would give you this value of 248, and basically they're saying none, but there's no salinity. When you do the detail, the conductivity comes back at 0.85, which is, as far as I'm concerned, okay. So in this case, this detailed salinity, or basically don't be concerned about salinity in the soil, corresponds with the regular soil test. However, if you were to look at the next soil test, we have a soil test, and these are soil tests that I was helping growers out, trying to identify problems. If we had just done the regular soil test, it ran 670, but basically the report, you would have just gotten slight. And I remember when I was interpreting these reports in my younger years, I assumed that slight meant no problem, don't worry about the salinity. But if you looked at you do the detailed salinity report, and you look at 3.96, if you recall, if you went to, it's just way off the charts in salinity, and that was the problem that vineyard was facing. So sometimes your soil report, the regular analysis matches up with the detailed salinity, and sometimes it doesn't. So it's very important to go ahead and get that detailed salinity report to really see what's going on. And with that, I'll go ahead and stop right now so my voice can take a break, and be glad to entertain any questions at this time, if there's any.
Well, I have the.
What? Everybody clear on salinity?
Ask your question.
Sure.
Question, unmute and ask your question.
This is Margaret Jordan. I have always grown green beans in Corpus Christi and never, ever, ever had a problem. They're very prolific normally.
Okay.
This year, I had to plant them 4 different times, and I still only ended up with like 2 or 3 green beans plants. And I'm wondering if maybe that bed got too much salt somehow.
It's very possible. Were the leaves yellowed? Were they sickly looking? I mean,
Well, to start with, they never even came up.
oh, they never even came up.
They never, which is very unusual. All the cucumbers came up faster than the green beans never came up. So I replanted 4 different times, 2 weeks apart.
Okay.
And then the plants that did come up didn't really look odd, but they didn't really do well. But
Well, I would suspect salinity. I mean, salinity turns out to be, at least in the Rio Grande Valley, you know, turns out to be, it's a culprit either because of the irrigation water or well water or the soil itself, because there's not good internal drainage.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll move on and just cover this next topic and then.
Yeah, our city water is really salty. We had 2 questions in the chat. Let me read them out.
Okay.
You were talking about celery being a water need plant. Asparagus was not on that list. Where is that on the range of water needs?
I would have to look it up, but you know, you can Google that. You know, that's one thing about the internet. You can find that, and they're pretty much spot on, especially if you go to a university website. I couldn't tell you, but you got to understand that asparagus is what I'll call a 2-year crop. You grow the leaves 1 year, then you cut the plant, and you get the sprouts. So it really takes approximately your 2nd year to get your asparagus. You don't get it. Yes.
You were saying that we have a lot of loam soils in our area. Corpus Christi is primarily Victoria clay.
Okay.
Is that technically a clay loam then?
By the name of it, does not sound like it, but I bet within the Victoria clay, there are many pockets of clay loams. Because you have to understand these soils, how they were made, they're basically all mixed up, you know, but you could, I mean, I'm sure you could find some Victoria clay spots that you could actually make clay pots and stuff, because it's, you know, it's nearly 100% clay. But I mean, I would suspect that 80% of that area are clay loams. Okay.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, so I've been talking about salinity, and of course, first thing that comes to everybody's mind is common table salt, sodium chloride. Okay, that's common table salt. We use it to, and so and sodium, those particular salts, sodium and chlorine, or chloride in this case, they're both toxic to plants. Okay, they're not good salts. But NH4 ammonium nitrate, potassium nitrate, calcium nitrate, calcium sulfate, magnesium sulfate, ammonium phosphate, those are all salts as well. They're all types of salts. They could be good salts. In other words, in the right amounts, there's plant benefits, but in excessive amounts, they're just as bad as the sodium chloride. It'd be, I would say, kind of equivalent as you drinking seawater. So when you're out, out in the Gulf, and you're whatever, stranded, don't have access to fresh water, you do you more harm by drinking the salty Gulf water or seawater. It's the same with plants. Basically, the increasing the salts in the soil, whether that's sodium chloride or the fertilizers that we use to grow these plants, if they're in excess, the plants can't draw out the fresh water from the soil. So they basically also dehydrate And actually, you know, and everyone knows if you take your, we'll say, man-made fertilizer and dump it in one spot on your lawn, you will burn it. You will kill the grass in that one spot. And basically that's, you know, they're salts. So when you do use fertilizers, organic or man-made, you want to make sure that you use them in the right amounts, which oftentimes turns out to be very little. So it's not like, you know, it's, with fertilizers, the more the better. That is not the case. The right amount is the best thing to use. So don't go around putting, you know, tons and tons of fertilizer trying to get a plant response, because you're basically adding more and more salts. So I'm not going to go through all this stuff. I'm going to go probably through this one slide because I think it's important for master gardeners to understand, because there's all kinds of perspectives out there on, and I'll say on agrochemicals or pesticides or herbicides or insecticides or fungicides. So basically here, this is a field of, or 2 rows of cowpeas. The row where you actually see the cowpeas, which is your row on your left-hand side, they've actually applied a man-made herbicide to take care of this weed, this sunflower-looking weed. On the right side, those same cowpeas were planted, but no man-made herbicide was applied at planting, and the weeds came through, and there was no cowpeas. So this is just, I include this slide often or all the time in my Master Gardener presentations to help them understand that in some cases, you know, there's no way you could hand-hoe this whole field of this weed. Sometimes using these man-made chemicals, these man-made pesticides, gives us the ability to grow a crop, produce a crop, and harvest a crop. Again, you know, I always hear it, well, you know, we don't need these pesticides. They do more harm to the environment. And I have, you know, pitched that question out to growers, and growers, U.S. growers don't have a problem if you removed all pesticides. The problem is your competitors, these other countries are not going to do that, and we would be not be competitive with them. So as long as country, as long as there's a worldwide use of pesticides, I don't see the U.S. ever going backwards in using man-made chemicals to control their weeds, their insects, or their diseases. So I thought I would just point that out. Again, in a home garden scenario or even a small acreage scenario, you can put weed barriers, you could use biodegradable mulch, all these things where you could actually go in there and basically poke holes or put your seed, put your transplant. Would help with the weed suppression. It would help with moisture retention. So, you know, plastics can also, you know, plastics can be a bad thing. How do you dispose of them? How were they made? So that's another, I guess, man-made technology that has helped in growing a lot of these crops successfully. Now I'll start off with the actually talking about vegetables. And I'm just going to talk about the cool season vegetables. I am not going to talk about the warm season vegetable because that'll carry us into too much time. But cool season vegetables are those vegetables that like cool weather, not freezing weather. That doesn't mean that they can't tolerate some levels of freezing weather, but even certain cool season vegetables can be burned seriously if there's a freeze. So this is a general grouping of how we group vegetables. Again, when would you want to plant these vegetables? Here in the Rio Grande Valley, I'd say probably be similar for you all in Nueces County, basically from Labor Day to Valentine's Day. That's going to be the coolest part. There might be a time period there that you all get a little older than we do, and that that, again, during that period, maybe you wouldn't want to plant any. I know that there's, I'd say gaps or planting gaps in between, meaning, you know, you
There
could plant.
are a lot of opinions out there as far as who.
Yes? Is there a question? Okay, so basically, just remember as master gardeners, we're going to be growing these vegetables when it's cool, even in the northern part of the US. Again, if you're in Wyoming, you know, the summertime is pretty cool, okay? So some of those vegetables are being grown in the summertime up further north because they have cool weather. Again, these vegetables, most of them will need some level of fertility, some level of especially nitrogen, but certainly phosphorus and potassium to be successful. Again, I will lump these vegetables by families or groups. And the first group that I'm going to be discussing is basically the crucifer group or the Brassicaceae family. And basically, as master gardeners, I want you to learn the families they belong to. And the reason behind that is normally they're going to have the same pests that attack them, the same insects that attack them. They're going to have the same diseases, especially soil-borne diseases. So if you say, for example, plant cabbage in one spot and you come back the next year growing Brussels sprouts in the same spot, basically you didn't do a rotation of that particular spot. So if the cabbage built up some soil disease, more than likely the Brussels sprouts would get it. But just to basically go over, everyone knows cabbage, broccoli, and cauliflower from this group, and everybody wants to grow them in their garden. But I would say, especially beginning gardeners fail at this, and they fail at this because they normally don't. They're difficult to get the size that they're accustomed to when they go to the store and buy these things. Again, that would relate to how much were they watered appropriately, were they fertilized appropriately. If they did all that, then they would get the correct size. But most of the time, people fail to water these three crops accordingly to meet their needs and their fertility needs. Now, on the other hand, when I talk to schools and school gardens, and certainly beginning gardeners, you want to start off in this family, you want to be successful, and basically kale, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts, radish, which belongs to this family. Most people don't realize that radishes are related to cabbage, collards, mustard, turnips, turnip greens. They're going to be your easiest things to grow in your garden, especially for schools. If you're going to, again, what a school does with a lot of mustard greens or turnip greens or kohlrabi or kale is a different thing because we're so used to cabbage, broccoli, and cauliflower. But I do, suggest or recommend to them to start with the easy stuff. Once they learn about growing the easy ones, they can, move up to the more difficult ones and be successful. Okay, cabbage, basically varieties that these can all be found. There's a handout that y'all should receive from that basically has these varieties in there, and next to it, the seed company where you can order it. So for your cabbages, your green cabbages, Extreme Vantage is a very good variety. It's a new variety. It is a black rot resistant variety. A black rot disease has really become a problem in our cabbages in the last 3 to 5 years for whatever reason. There's Blue Vantage, Solid Blue 780, Bravo would be your green cabbages. For red, Super Red 115, and Red Jewel. And I believe there was a question in the chat box. I saw it pop up. Is there a question? Being no questions, I'll move on to.
I forgot to unmute before going over to the chat.
Okay.
The first one was, is there such a thing as a cool weather tomato?
No. No, no, no. Tomatoes are warm season. Now,
And
now I do want to say that tomatoes don't like hot weather. Okay, it's the same thing. Just like these cool season vegetables don't like freezing weather, warm season vegetables don't want 100-degree weather either. So you know, there's this ideal range of, I'll say, from 60 to 89. You know, if we had weather like that, California weather, well, they'd all grow perfectly. We don't have that in Texas. So, but tomatoes do need relatively cool nights so their tomato flowers can set and set fruit.
And the other question was, how do I find the handout that tells me what varieties are appropriate?
I believe I sent them to Vince. I'm not sure that he sent them all out to you, but I did send basically 3 handouts and this presentation.
Okay, so they will be linked to on our VMS to this particular night.
They'll be
Right.
posted on the VMS after the presentation.
Okay. So broccoli, basically we all want that big broccoli that we see there on the right-hand side, you know, in our gardens. And I will say broccoli's a very flaky vegetable. You got to have the right varieties in South Texas to get that big head. And some of those varieties would be Green Magic, Marathon, and Pac-Man. And don't forget, after you cut that broccoli crown or head, that you'll still get sprouts on the side. And those, you can collect all those sprouting little things on that left-hand, upper left-hand picture, and have these broccoli florets as well that continue. So the plant can keep on going for a little bit more. So it's not just that individual crown. Cauliflower, the cauliflower area has really exploded in recent, and I'm talking about in the last 10 years with colored cauliflower. We're all, you know, myself used to the white cauliflower, and when I saw that green looking thing, and you know, the farmer told me that was a cauliflower, I said, well, that's the most unusual cauliflower. That's a Romanesco, basically a cross between a cauliflower and a broccoli, but it's sold in the cauliflower group. Okay, so you have the regular white cauliflower variety snow crown. There's lots of Romanesco crosses. It seems that they all do well, at least here in South Texas, that I've come across. And then of course there's the purple cauliflower with a variety of graffiti. Collards, easy to grow. Georgia Southern, Champion, and Flash would be varieties I would recommend. Kale again has, you know, we're used to the regular green kale. That variety would be blue curled, but there's red kale, that would be red boar. And then there's what they call these Italian or Tuscan or dragon, but I call them lancenato kales. So, you know, the kale thing is also, at least in colors and types, has really changed in the last 10 years. Kohlrabi, we've had red kohlrabi for a long time, but it's becoming, you know, a lot of this colored type vegetables is becoming more common in the grocery store, more common at farmers markets. People do want color. So a red kohlrabi would be cobri, and a nice big green kohlrabi would be winter. For mustard green, same thing. We got Savannah, which is a red colored mustard green, and of course the regular mustard greens. Varieties would be Florida broadleaf and Southern giant curled. Turnips, you can actually have a turnip that's all basically leaves, very little turnip root, and that variety is called all top, or you could have the traditional purple top white globe variety, easy to grow. Brussels sprouts, also another popular thing in home gardens, very easy to grow. Varieties, Cape Cross and Royal Marvel do well? Sure. Question? No questions. Radishes. Radishes are, I think, easy to grow, something I recommend school gardens, and they go from the traditional, the red radishes that we're all familiar with Cherry Belle and Cherryette as varieties, but there are what they'll call watermelon colored and many different colored, not and even black colored radishes. So there's many colored radishes, but my favorite would be that's called daikon. Some people call it oriental radish. That great big white thing on the bottom picture, that's a radish. It is doesn't look anything like a radish. And one of the things that I like to encourage beginners and school gardens to grow them because they are very prolific. They grow big. I remember going to a school garden, having the students pull out the daikon, and of course they grew humongous, bigger than the one in the picture there. And they all had a big smile on their face, like they grew the champion vegetable, even though they probably weren't going to eat it, but just certainly, part of gardening is just being successful, and that's a big thing. Otherwise, people lose interest or they're not very successful, and that's certainly a variety, with variety being summer cross to show and showcase something that's very easy to grow. Another cool season family is the goosefoot or Chenopodiaceae family. I know that sounds very unusual, but basically, just recently they've basically lumped this whole group into a subfamily of Amaranthaceae, meaning that the very common weeds in South Texas, the one called lamb's quarter is a Chenopodiaceae, and pigweed or Amaranthus is in the Amaranthaceae. And both of these are edible weeds. I do not encourage anyone to go out and start collecting these weeds to eat unless they know what they're doing. But my understanding is that they are edible. So if you've never done it, do not do it. But these are edible weeds. But within this family, we have 3 vegetables, basically vegetables that you would never think are related to these weeds, lamb's quarter and pigweeds. First being beets, very easy to grow. The red beets being red A's. If you want a golden beet, that'd be touchstone gold. Beets love our alkaline soils. They're very nutritious vegetable, easy to grow. The next member in the same family is spinach. They're in the goosefoot family. Again, of course, they're in Crystal City. We have the statue of Popeye, as basically a spinach capital. Before spinach took off in California, Texas was the leader in spinach production. Prior to that, and of course, there's a spinach processing plant for spinach that comes from that area, as well as the Rio Grande Valley. So Texas has a long history with spinach. Varieties there would be Samish, Tyee, and Bloomsdale. And Swiss chard being the last member of the goosefoot family. Again, and all, I would say beets and Swiss chard are very salt tolerant. Spinach is very salt sensitive, even though they're in the same family, is just to show you that not everything transfers. But for Swiss chard, I like to include Swiss chard for school gardens, especially this colored Swiss chard. That's a variety called Bright Lights, just for color. The peel, the students, the kids can react to it versus the regular white rib rhubarb chard or Ford Hook giant Swiss chard varieties. You can get color. The next cool season vegetable family, we've gone through the Brassicaceae, basically the crucifer family, the goosefoot family. Now we're in the umbel family, umbelliferae. The most famous one of the umbel family is the carrot family. Of course, within the carrots are parsley, cilantro, and fennel, and dill, all easy to grow. Celery is in this family. Again, I have difficult, and we all know the reason I put difficult is because of its very high water requirement. You got to water, celery is a plant that requires lots of water, mostly comprised of water. When they tell you to go on a diet, celery is one of the first things they mention because basically that plant's just one big gigantic water trough. So not that it's impossible, it's just difficult to get the celery size that you're familiar with in the stores. Varieties of the orange carrots would be Sugar Snacks and Bolero, but just be aware that there's yellow, white carrots. You can actually buy these already pre-packaged where you get yellow, white, orange, and the dark purple carrots all together. Again, color is important, and basically just recently came across, before when we had the purple carrots, we had carrots that were purple on the outside but orange in the inside. Now we got purple carrots that are purple throughout. I did make a caldo with the purple carrots, which, caldo tasted good, but all those I guess colorations, pigments came out, and the caldo was all purple, which, like I told my wife, could be a Halloween caldo, because it was so unusually looking. So, those things there's some of these carrots with a lot of these strong pigments. I have this bottom picture here of carrots growing in a raised bed, and the reason I do is carrot seed is very small, and if you're going to plant by hand, you're probably going to put 3, 4, or 5 seeds together. They're going to grow kind of together, but they're not going to allow each other to grow properly. So you want to space them properly. If you want a 1-inch carrot diameter, you want the plants to have a 1-inch distance. If you want them to have 2-inch diameter, you got to space them out to 2 inches or 3 inches. So spacing is very important for carrots to get their size. Parsley, of course, there's plain leaf parsley, plain Italian dark. There's a curled parsley, forest green. So there's all kind of easy to grow. Again, cilantro, easy to grow. Varieties there, Santo and Calypso. There tend to be the most, what we'll call bolt resistant. And bolting is another word for flowering. So when cilantro gets into a period of some heat, it's a trigger for it to flower or to bolt, which is this big, long, purple stem-looking thing. Is basically you have a flower up here. It'll look like a carrot or a carrot flower, have you ever seen, or a Queen's Anne lace flower. So when you get to kind of to this bolting stage, the cilantro tends to be more bitter, taste a little different. So normally we do not want it bolting. So these two varieties are the most bolt tolerant or bolt resistant for us here in the Rio Grande Valley. Dill and fennel, easy to grow, whether you use dill, super ducat, or fennel leaf, very easy to grow in the garden. I like to include dill in school gardens because, one, it's aromatic. That's a smell that you can show the kids, and they smell it, they recognize it in their dill pickles. If they recognize it. Another thing, we also get basically a dill weed moth or a butterfly that attacks it, and it's a very colorful caterpillar, and so that's another added bonus. And I believe I have a question in the chat box. Any questions in the chat box?
The question was, our parsnips are in this same family?
Excuse me?
The question was, are parsnips in the same family?
Yes, they are. Parsnips, parsley. I didn't include them in here, but yes, parsnips are in the same family, and there's root parsley as well. in the same family. Yes. Now moving on to the next cool season family, the allium family. People refer to it as, of course, onions as the onion family. Of course, onions easy to grow in the garden. Leeks, chives, scallions. I labeled garlic as difficult to grow in the garden, and that's mainly because most people have this idea they could grow this garlic in the garden and then dry it and hold it and eat it later. The fact is, here in the Rio Grande Valley, and I'm sure in Nueces County, it is too humid, and the high humidity basically allows for moisture to get back behind the scales or of the garlic, and you'll have a mold or it'll start to decay really, really fast. Now, for fresh garlic, in other words, you're going to harvest the garlic plant and use it right away, it is perfect. Matter of fact, many restaurants, people at farmers markets are actually looking for fresh garlic, meaning the leaves and the garlic bulb itself, in comparison to this dried garlic. So garlics are easy. It's just people want to save the garlic cloves and dry them and use, and cook with them for the coming year. And that does not happen down here. The garlic is grown in areas where there's low humidity, like the deserts, so they don't decay when you put them up. Again, when do you want to plant onions? You want to plant onions during this month of October, all the way through late November. If you're going to buy transplants, you can plant those transplants in December through as late as February. Again, probably the most famous onion variety, of course, is the Texas 1015. Years back, you could not buy the Texas 1015 onion seed or onion plants, but now you can. You can buy Texas 1015 onion plants from Dixondale Farms, and you can plant them in your garden, and you can have Texas 1015 onions. Now, you will still go to H-E-B or your retail stores and see super sweet Texas 1015. That is a marketing thing. Those onions that you see at the store are not the variety 1015. They have low pungency like a Texas 1015, but it's a marketing thing. So there are many different varieties. So, but homeowners until recently, meaning 5 to, I'd say 7 years ago, can now purchase Texas 1015 plant. Nobody can purchase the seed, but you can purchase the plant. Again, these onions that we grow in Nueces County through the Rio Grande Valley are called short day onions because they're grown in the short days of the year. And that's very critical because that short day or long night is basically what allows the bulb in the right process to initiate bulbing. If it's not a short day onion and you say plant a long day onion in this time frame, it will not bulb because it did not get the trigger to make a bulb, or vice versa. Take a short day onion up north to the long days of summer and it won't bulb. So there's short day onions, there's midday onions. A variety of a midday onion would be candy. Those midday onions are generally grown around the Dallas, Overton area. They call them noonday onions. There's still a few around, especially if you're driving up there, I'm gonna guess sometime in the summer, June, July, you might go to a farmer's market and come across some noonday onions or midday onions. And then there's no long day onions grown in Texas. Those are grown basically in Colorado to Idaho to Northern California, Washington and Oregon. So just be aware as a master gardener that in onions, there's a day length criteria. So we grow short day onions because that's the time of the year that it's cool. So we need onions that are labeled short day to get that bulb. Okay,
Do
leeks.
walking onions work in South Texas? The Egyptian walking onions?
I would think all these I call them sprouting, or all these bulbing onions. I think they all do well. They're different kinds of onions. So I would say yes. I have seen all kind of, I call them ornamental onions growing. But when I'm talking about the onions, I'm talking about the onions that we're all most familiar with.
No, I'm talking about a top-setting edible that's just an ancient variety.
It's just, you're just growing the top and no bulbs.
No, it top sets so that you can plant new ones and
Okay.
harvest the more mature bulbs.
Well, I'm not familiar with that, so I'm not going to go there. I'm not familiar with that. I mean, I would probably defer to other master gardeners to.
All right, I'll kidnap some from Pennsylvania and try them.
Yeah, try them. I will tell you this: we're not in Pennsylvania. I will tell you that. We're in Texas.
Well, I know.
Okay?
I know, believe me. But
I hope you know that. Okay, leeks, same time.
they came
frame.
from Egypt. You never know.
Well, you never know. You never know. But I have seen what I call the bunching onions. They make a lot of little that's like big bunching onions, of course. But anyways, those they do grow down here in South Texas. Leeks, again, same time frame. Basically, if you're going to plant by seed, October to December, transplant December to February. The key thing with people that like leeks or familiar with leeks is they want that stem to be white. And the way you achieve that is by covering up to that neck of the plant with soil, but because you're basically blocking the sunlight from that area, so there's no chlorophyll, or the green color doesn't develop. So part of the reason we don't grow a lot of leeks in Texas is because they're grown in, I'll say, Mexico, because they have the labor to go there and basically keep scooping dirt, soil up on the neck to basically keep that stem nice and pearly white and blanched. And you can do that as a gardener and do that. But if you just plant your leeks and don't do that, that stem will be green. It won't be white as the traditional leeks that you're familiar with at the store. So if you want a smaller size, there's one that's called baby bunchy. If you want a large size leek, the variety is called Lancelot. Chives and scallions, again, the same time frame. I would say for your scallions, basically meaning bulbous bunching onions. That could be a bulbing onion that you just harvest early, or there are varieties that won't bulb at all, and basically you're harvesting for the green leaves or the green top, as that bottom picture. Now chives is what I'll call a miniature onion leaves, and there's no bulb. So the best place for chives would be in pots. If you try to grow in soil like I did there in that picture, the weeds will just beat you out because they're, one, very slow growing. They're not very competitive. You know, before you know it, that was kept clean by hoeing, and then eventually I quit for like 1 week and I couldn't even find the chives anymore. So that would be something, you know, y'all would be aware of. You know, that the chives are not competitive in the soil. And I believe this will be my last family. Of course, this is the family, last cool season family. This would be the lettuce family. Basically, it's in the Asteraceae or composite or sunflower family. Again, there's head lettuce. It actually forms a head, whether it's iceberg or romaine. I've labeled those as difficult. Or your leaf lettuce. There's many types of leaf lettuce, as you see in the pictures. They're very easy to grow. Again, if I was going to recommend something for a school garden, I would go with spinach. It's more nutritious, and it's going to be even easier to grow than even your leaf lettuce. But there's no doubt, schools continue to try to grow head lettuce, whether it's romaine or iceberg, and at least in the valley, always fail. It's never successful. So I'm just, letting you know about that people are always going to be headstrong about trying to have lettuce, whether they're going to use it in a cafeteria or in their home. And it's just going to be very, very difficult based on our weather. Again, when you want to grow this, again, as a cool season, you really want that cool weather. I would say pretty much the winter time. Again, you want to plant those seeds kind of shallow. In other words, don't cover them up with so much soil because they need some light to germinate. And some tricks of the trade is to take your lettuce seed and put it in the refrigerator for several days before you plant them. It seems like that chilling is a trigger for them to germinate. That's totally different than any of the other cool season vegetables that I've talked about, but it works for lettuce. So that might be something for you to consider if you're not able to get the lettuce up. Another member that would be a member of the Asteraceae family is dandelion. I bring this up because it does come up, especially now with our spring mix salad mixes. Basically, again, here on the right-hand side, we have common dandelion, a weed. I know that in Central Texas, they go out and have dandelion picnics or collections and harvest the weed and eat it. Again, if you've never done it, do not do it. There are so many other weeds that look like dandelion that are not dandelion that I would say, I want you to be familiar as master gardeners that it is an edible weed also. But just to make things confusing, the dandelion that you find that's called the dandelion in your spring mix salad mixes that you buy at the stores is not anything it is a composite family member, but it is not a dandelion. It is actually Italian chicory. And again, we're all familiar with chicory coffee from New Orleans, and that basically is a flavoring, comes from the root. But Italian chicory, the variety Clio, and there's several other varieties, but the variety I recommend is what goes into your spring mix, salad mix. It's actually chicory being called dandelion, and it's not even a dandelion, totally different, totally different plant. Just so you know that there is, and it probably would be labeled as dandelion, and it turns out to be a chicory plant that is sold in the stores. So with that, I will stop and be glad to entertain any questions. Any questions?
I have a random question, if I can ask it.
Sure.
I have a really large basil plant that I ignored for too long, and now it's all woody and huge. And I'm not sure if I'm able to trim it right down at this point, or if it's just a lost cause. It's probably 2 feet tall and very woody.
I have two basils. I have two basil plants myself, and I do cut one down, once, not maybe as big as yours, but I do cut them down so it will come back. But I will say you can buy basil seed, start them in a pot, and that's basically what I did. And another easy thing to grow is basil.
Okay, thank you.
I tried killing my basil plant and I couldn't even kill it. It's still growing. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I'm sort of attached to this thing after a year or so,
Any other questions? Well, if there's no further questions, I'll hand it over back to Vince.
Oh, you're not going to come back and do warm season veggies? Oh.
I'm not going to do warm. We're not in the warm season, and my voice is about to give out, but maybe I will give the warm season vegetables at some other time.
Right.
Well, maybe that can be a meeting presentation at some point.
Yes.
Maybe in February.
Yes.
Well, I have one quick question before you go. I just planted out, put some sweet corn. I'm getting a greenhouse, and it's polycarbonate. So
Okay.
do you think I can grow sweet corn here during this time of the year? Don't laugh. I see you laughing. Don't laugh.
Well, I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend it, but you could prove me wrong. I mean, you are going to protect it. So you're trying to protect the plants. But if it gets in the low 40s in there, it's not going to like it.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Everybody's dashing my hopes. Okay. Thank you.
But you can plant it in the spring and be successful.
Right on. Thank
Yep.
you.
Mhm.
I think that number of sunshine hours will also affect your corn.
True.
Well, I also heard, now I don't know if this is true, but that you could maybe at least 6 hours of sunlight, you might be able to get away, but I don't know. The way where I'm situating my greenhouse, it's where I've been watching the sun all year. So in the winter, that particular area gets mostly all the sun in all through the day. So we'll just see what happens.
Tara, that 6 hours is for things that you harvest the leaf, but anything that you harvest the fruit, or it has to flower and set seed.
That's why
that takes a lot more energy.
Okay, that's why I'm in this class. Now I know. Thank you so much.
Takes a lot of energy to fruit, and a lot of fertilizer. If it takes phosphorus and calcium.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Unless you're a tater doesn't take as much phosphorus or calcium. It takes a lot of potassium. Taters are weird.
Tell me about potatoes if you can, Mr. Juan, because I'm a potato girl and I want to grow myself a few potatoes for the winter.
Well, I mean, I would certainly talk to master gardeners, and they have taught me, if you're going to grow potatoes, you use that what I call the canister method, where you layer them, you'll be successful. But potatoes are like tomatoes. They are a warm season vegetable. They don't like it too hot either. So it makes it very difficult for us to be successful with potatoes. But when we grow potatoes here in the Rio Grande Valley commercially, we plant them in the middle of December through early January. So you know what that could mean, right? That could mean that we get a cold front near freezing in January or February, and the tops of those potatoes are smoked. But they can't plant them so late because they'll become potato soup with any moisture. So we have such a narrow window to plant potatoes in the soil. So your best bet is in canisters.
So
and Peru, they plant them just before it freezes, and they wait until the spring for them to sprout. They just overwinter them in the soil and then let nature take its course.
Yeah,
the Peruvian Andes, they've been growing them for years. That's where they started.
Mid-December to when, please?
No, but in Nueces County, we do it in February, mid-February.
Yeah.
Okay, mid-February?
Yes. My grandfather always said between Washington and the president's birthdays, between the president's birthday. So I always say Valentine's Day. Mid-February, we plant our potatoes in Nueces County.
Okay, you're so awesome. Thank you.
Yes. All farmers talk about Mother's Day, Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
I would plant them in November and wait for them to sprout in February. I'm lazy.
We can buy seed potatoes here too, Beth. Tara.
Yeah. That's what I was gonna do.
Buy seed potatoes, and then you cut them, and you try to make 2 eyes per piece, and then the white part goes down, and then the part with the eyes goes up. Okay. And then you make a hill like a mountain, right. And as they grow, you keep pushing the dirt to the top.
Well, I was going to grow mine in grow bags.
Yeah, that'll work too. Yeah. You start at the bottom, and you just keep adding as the leaves grow up.
Okay.
Well, if you do grow bags, then you do have to wait till it's warmer because the grow bags change temperature too much. I concede.
Okay. And by the way, if nobody has tried that lacinato kale that he was talking about, it is so delicious. The black Italian kale. We had some for dinner last night. So you should go to H-E-B and purchase some to see if you like it. It's really delicious.
If anybody needs volunteer hours, the botanical garden needs a lot of help right now with weeds. And if you have trouble standing a long time, there's an area to sit by the roses. So you can actually sit on the ledge and pull weeds.
The roses don't exist anymore, but I'll be there this weekend.
No, ma'am, there is tons of roses at the botanical garden.
Oh yeah, I was thinking about the earth kind bed because I dug them all up. Yeah. You know, they all died except for one.
Yeah, they had disease.
Well, nobody told me.
Well, we've been spraying them. They had.
Okay, everybody. We're off topic here, and we don't want to keep Juan beyond his time. So let's give him a thumbs up there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And
Thank you, Juan.
Thank you.
all of
We
you,
learned a little bit of something. Thank you. Thank you.
all of you that participated tonight, I did you an additional favor. I just forwarded the email with all of the handouts, the PowerPoint, and the doctor's bio, so that you don't have to go to the VMS to get it. But if you can't find it, go to VMS and it's uploaded.
Thank you so much, Vince.
We have a Wednesday class, lab. Mary Sherwood is going to be part of that, and it looks like she's already signed out. So we'll see you guys at 5:30 on Wednesday for the lab. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Good Wednesday.
We really appreciate it. Great presentation.
Thank you, Vince.
Yes.
It's
Bye-bye.
great. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Juan. Bye.
Does anybody know who I gave my shirt to at the thing? I gave my Master Gardener shirt to somebody. One I couldn't wear.
Tara, I do
Yes.
know that Kevin ended up with your shirt because he went to take Becky her shirt, and and the shirt, her shirt she ordered is the one she ordered and it fit her.
Okay.
So he has your shirt.
Well, I had two shirts, and one was an extra large, which is what I needed. The large was too small. So I gave the small to somebody down at the local grow. So if he got it back, I'll email him and see what he says.
He has your extra shirt.
Okay, right on.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.